Now, this is a conference on the good society. Happiness was frequently mentioned. And what I want to present to you are stories of despair and misery. So I'm so thankful to Professor Wang that you also presented all kinds of bad things. We have a competition going. You think China is the worst? Let me show you a few things about the United States and actually the rest of the world. So I'm presenting something that is the beginning of a project. And there are two basic vectors that organize my research. I'm just going to talk about one. The one that I'm not going to talk about has to do with a specific feature of this current period, a period that begins in the 1980s for me, you know, the neoliberal project, extraordinarily sort of complexities in the financial system, extraordinary inventions in technology and in all kinds of sciences. And it seems to me that when you take a bit of a distant look to the whole matter, that we have managed to produce enormously complex processes, conditions, forms of knowledge, vast battalions of extremely intelligent and innovative people to get at what? At too many elementary brutalities. We have enormous complexities, and at the end of that chain, we often wind up, especially when we look at the social and the economic, with rather elementary brutalities. We can transport organs of people, you know, across a vast distance, and there they arrive fresh, as if they were just still taken out of the... And look what we leave behind. The subprime mortgage, 14 steps in between to use a contract on an asset. It's not about paying the money on the mortgage in order to produce a very complex financial instrument. So these are kinds of issues that I don't want to talk about, but they hover a bit over my talk. The second vector organizing this research has to do with what I might very, very quickly describe as a set of trends: more inequality, more poverty, more displacement. I'm looking at global north, global south, a whole series of domains. I'm not going to cover all here. And to me, they amount to something that we need to name. We cannot say, we have more unemployment, we have more inequality. At what point are we dealing with a switch in orders of magnitude such that we need to name the matter? So, I mean, for a very quick, almost dirty title, I'm saying beyond inequality, what we're really looking at are expulsions, expulsions from a system. To make this argument, and this holds more, I think, for the social sciences than for economics, perhaps, but as a social scientist, when you're immersed in a very messy setting, you know, where you're getting your information from, what you are observing, what you're studying, the point where you situate yourself for that inquiry actually matters a lot. So when I'm in this particular project on expulsions, I'm situating myself at the edge of a system. Now, the edge is a systemic edge. It's not geographic. The edge can be right there in the middle of Manhattan. It's a systemic edge. And sort of to put it in very simple terms, what is the traffic at the edge of the system? Do things come in, or do things mostly go out? To give a context, a bit in simplistic terms, I would argue that in the period of, say, the Keynesian, whatever, that's a dangerous word to use, but the period of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, certainly in this country, but in many other countries, mass production, mass construction of suburban housing, mass consumption. That meant that the system, quick way of putting it, valued workers, people as workers, and as consumers. Not because it was a nice system, but the systematicity meant that if you're going to have consumption, you needed good wages, etc. So the traffic that you would see at the edge of the system means that people are brought in, mostly as consumers, and then the worker wages is almost a dependent variable, I would say. Today, I argue that if you put yourself at the edge of that system, what you see is expulsions of all sorts. Now, I'm looking at different modalities, not just work and employment. I'm looking at land grabs and displaced people through land grabs, et cetera, et cetera. Here, I'm just going to mention a few. Now, again, I repeat this edge bit. It's a systemic edge. It's not geographic, so it doesn't mean going to the frontier of the United States down there with Mexico, no. When I did again, as a reference, when I did my global city work, I situated myself at the center of the system. So the global city is really an acute power system in a way. Both of these, the edge and the center, are minority situations. The majority of conditions, the majority of people, the majority of workers, the majority of et cetera, don't necessarily fit these two extremes. But I think that there is a heuristic value when you deal with such messy conditions that the extreme actually becomes a heuristic vehicle to understand some of these trends. Now, I repeat, I am at the beginning of this project. So just to take some empirical references, and I want to work with some of the data from the 2010 census of the United States. Some of the data are familiar, et cetera. So we know, for instance, that the number of long-term employed has increased significantly. The number of people who by the age of 30 have never had a job and are very unlikely to have a job has increased. The middle classes are getting impoverished. The sons and daughters of the middle class, this is all the 2010 census, the sons and daughters of the middle class are getting less formal education, less income, less likely to own their home. Now, again, we're not necessarily, that doesn't mean the majority, but that is certainly the trend. The question of, I just wanted to show a table here. This doesn't come from the census. This comes from other data that I'm working on. The foreclosures. I think there is something to be learned about too. This is subprime mortgage. I think maybe some of the people not from the United States don't know that, but the subprime mortgage, the people who got those mortgages are not necessarily the guilty party. It is more of an instrument that really abused. All they wanted from those people was a contract. Whether they could or not pay the mortgage didn't matter, which led to all kinds of abuses, of what is in itself a very good concept, a subprime mortgage. Now, if you look at these figures, we're talking households. Many of these foreclosed properties means that the household has been thrown out. The figures right now, the best figures that we have over 9 million foreclosures. Now, that represents households. Households could be 1, 3, 5, etc. So we're talking probably about 25 to 30 million people. I'm Dutch, little country, total population 16 million. I don't know about Americans, huge country, China, huge country, very little figures, these millions. These to me are huge figures. And it also represents an order of magnitude that goes beyond prior crises. I don't know about, the first depression, 1930s. That is a very sort of different story. But certainly in this sort of, the modernity of most of the 20th century. Now, the contracts are already out. That doesn't sound good. It's not mafia contracts, but they are almost. And we know that the total could reach over 14 million. Again, I repeat, most of these people many already are out of their houses, and most of them probably will be. And here is a particular figure. Where is that thingy? I just want you to look at one, I think this is it, right? I'm just taking an extreme, right? This is New York City, 202, 206, 4 groups, white, black, years 202, 206, 205, 206 are very acute years. Now, the numbers that you see on this table is the incidence of people who got mortgages, of subprime mortgages and people who got mortgages. It means that 47% of all blacks in New York City in 2005 who got a mortgage got a subprime mortgage. It is the highest number. Many of these people have lost their home. And of course, the issue of what the impact on cities, on neighborhoods, on families, I'm not even getting there because those are very highly variable. So you also see sort of an incidence of the more vulnerable got hit extra hard. We also know from other evidence that many black families or households would have qualified for a normal mortgage, which would have meant that they were far less likely to lose their home. We have this kind of data for many cities in the United States. To me, this is something that we can't just say, a bit more. There's something else. It's like a switch in orders of magnitude. Now, I wanted to show these graphs, which some of you may know, and what is interesting is the shape, very nice shape here. You can see it's the income share of the top 10% of earners. At the beginning of our century, right up there, the top 10% of earners, how shall we put it, received, grabbed, choose your work, got your word, 47% more or less of national income. They are, of course, types who will also have other sources of, of wealth, of income. This is 1942, if I have it right, sharp drop in that share. It's still a very nice share. It's about 33%. And then it goes up again in 1987. These are the adorable sort of, mass manufacturing, mass production years. To some extent, this decline represents the growth of a middle class. What the top loses, got distributed over a prosperous working class, prosperous middle class. 1987, which I always think is the time sort of when the global age begins, look how it zooms up. You see, we're not doing so well either, right? Now, this is another graph which shows the growth in after-tax income again, for the United States, 1979 to 2007. The red is the top 1%. Income there increased by after-tax, et cetera, income by 281%. The top, what are we talking? The top 20%, 95%. And look at the flatness of these curves. And here my interest is the growing distance between the top, whether we take the top 1 or even the top, this is actually a significant difference, the top 20%. At what point does this kind of sort of separation, actually reflect a deeper structural transformation that we cannot simply describe as more inequality? I mean, some of them are honest murderers, and we should just keep them in jail. But many are being warehoused, and we know that once they are in there, cultural issues come into play, and many do not wind up returning to productive lives, as the phrase has it. So there's a whole series of these kinds of questions that I'm looking at. Now, in the global South, just because this is clearer and more dramatic, the expulsions here are, if you want more, you can literally see them. This is just, a few figures. We can count up to, this is a whole bunch of agencies and institutes, et cetera, that are looking at this. So up to 70 million hectares. That's quite a bit of land, actually. It's a small fraction of total land in the world, but it is a significant amount of land. And mostly in Africa, including North Africa, Latin America, Russia, Ukraine, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. The buyers are government agencies. They often lease rather than buy because of issues, but it's de facto buying, one could say, and firms. The main buyers, for the case of sub-Saharan Africa, in the last 2 years, the main buyers are financial firms, hedge funds, and it's not because they're about to become farmers. It's a great investment. Now, consequences are that the land, this point number 2 here, the land, in a way, is more valuable than whatever is on top of it. There might be village economies, rural, industrial sort of sectors or factories, small farmer agriculture. It is, final point there, the active making of surplus populations. For me, the term surplus population is now a working term. It is not simply surplus as sort of a passive. No, it is a term that I want to recover and make it work analytically. We are making surplus populations. This is not simply some function of something else. And so there is a whole process in that as well. I have a little footnote there. This is sort of, there is a good theoretical dose in this work, inevitably. And I'm really also trying to understand, when China buys 3 million hectares of land in Zambia or in Congo. All kinds of other countries are buying too. And it transforms it into a plantation for palm, to produce biofuels. What happens to that land? First, evictions of faunas, of floras, of whole villages, of small sort of, holder agriculture, small farms, rural factories, rural industrialization spots. You have a lot of that in the global south. And what kind of terrain? Is that still territory? Territory, complex category with embedded logics of power, embedded logics of claim making. Territory is not ground, it's not land. This is like a demoting of complex sovereign territory, no matter how bad those governments are sometimes, to something that is much more elementary. To me, I see, well, what I see are sort of informal jurisdictions in the making. Very elementary jurisdictions, sort of structural blanks and holes in what is still, certainly vis-a-vis the international system, sovereign national territory. So this comes with all kinds of meanings. The expulsions that I'm talking about cover a broad array of, of aspects. Another example are mines. I'm working on this one. This is in Colombia. This is a South African, gold mine. And here, one of the things I'm looking at, this is sort of a bit the complexity leading to brutality. So fracking, open mining, et cetera, it actually is a complex technology. It is brutal. So what Gold Ashanti has told, there's now a lawsuit, et cetera. I'm a bit involved in all of that. What Gold Ashanti, Anglo Gold has told the government of Colombia, we only stay there for 15 years. The people can stay on the land. All we want is access to those 161 water springs. Those are sources. I mean, that's critical, for the general water supply. And we want, and what they basically need is 250,000 liters of water per hour of work. I don't mean per hour of work of individuals, per hour of work of the whole operation. After those 15 years, they don't want to own that land, but they leave dead land. So one of the maps that I'm making is a global map. It's hard work because it keeps adding of dead land, which means toxic land, destroyed land. Some of that land will come back to life, but some of it really will not, except if one puts it, through some cleaning process. So to me, this also has to do with this brutality that comes out of very complex processes of production or financial instruments, whatever it might be. And and again here for me also the question is that it's a demotion of this complex category that is territory with authority and rights, et cetera, embedded in it, to something very elementary, very simple. And I see a lot of this. One of my projects, a new little book that I'm writing, is called When Territory Exits Conventional Framings, or something like that. That's a working title. It's not the final title, clearly. But when you begin to look at the world in those terms, you see that there is a lot of this happening. And so the question of mining, the question of land grabs, as they're nicely called, is really a significant one. Now, I want to sort of wrap it up. And if I go back to this notion of the era of mass manufacturing, mass consumption in a context of a national, strong political economy, one could say that a market economy can deliver a broad middle class and reduce inequality. That was like a golden era, clearly. It tells us something about the market. Second point, that image of what the market can deliver remains, I think, the dominant image of the market economy. And what I am checking out, in a way, in this research is to what extent is that image of the market appropriate. I think we really are dealing with a new political economy. So for me, the market is embedded really in a larger political economy. And the larger political economy with which we deal, the question, the issue of outsourcing, I mean, all the variety of elements that have altered the political economy within which manufacturing functions. And, well, again, that last slide. Today's articulations between the character of the market economy, the larger political economy, the constraints within which it works, are rather different from that golden era that I think for many people still is the model of the market economy in a democracy. And so we have the financializing of more and more economic sectors. One could go on for a very long while talking about that. which means that the sources of profit become quite autonomous from the kinds of sectors in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, et cetera, that sort of fed the growth of a working class, of a middle class, the family wage, all of that. There's so much distance that they're almost autonomous. They're not completely, I think, but they are. And so that then immediately is a massive qualifier of the good that can come from a market economy. The sharp income inequality. So even within the zone that is the market economy, when you have this level of inequality, what you wind up having is a lot of luxury niche markets that reproduce those inequalities. And final point, I mean, I have done a lot of work on urban economies. I think there is nothing better for an urban economy than a vast middle class. Not a luxury middle class, a modest middle class. The city is their means of production, so to say. It's everything. It's their space of consumption. They spend most of their money in the city, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, you need elites that will produce beautiful civic spaces and buildings. That's very important. But what you cannot have is what we have right now in New York City. Let me give you and end with this. The figures that come from the census. New York City is a city that has long been a machine to produce wealth. The census doesn't have this language. This is my language. And in 1980, the top 1% of earners received, whatever the word, 12% of the income generated in New York City, which is frankly not so unreasonable. And New York was a bit poor then. Let's remember that it was, it had come out of a severe sort of bankruptcy. In 2009, the top 1% received 44% of the earnings produced by New York City. That is not a healthy condition. That does not produce a good economy. Thank you very much.